Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge and Company. A protector of voters and an outspoken advocate for reform of New York State's election laws, Douglas Kellner recently left the New York City's Board of Elections to become a member and co-chair of New York State's Board of Elections. There better be a good reason that you left us in this city. Why did you do this?
Well, this is a crucial time where the State Board of Elections will be making the decisions about certification of new voting systems to implement the Help America Vote Act.
We have a new law.
That's right.
It was passed in...
Well, Congress passed the Help America Vote Act in 2002.
As a result, was it of Florida?
That's correct.
And what happened in Florida? Let's start at the very beginning and try to make sense for people who don't know anything, don't understand the whole situation.
Well, you had two issues in Florida. One was the fact that many voters were voting on punch card ballots. And punch card ballots, you get a little piece of cardboard and you punch out a hole in the ballot. And a lot of people didn't punch it so that the chad, which is the hole, the paper that
fills the hole,
fully detached from the ballot. And it turned out that there were very many disputes over whether you could have 1, 2, 3, or 4 points of the chad hanging to determine whether the voter actually cast the ballot.
And not every county in Florida had that system, though.
That's right. And not every county used the same rules for deciding whether the vote would actually count. So that was one of the issues. The other one was the so-called butterfly ballot, where many voters thought they were voting for Al Gore and in fact were voting for Pat Buchanan because the way the ballot was laid out poorly.
So Congress, the public it went to the Supreme Court, didn't it?
That's right.
The election. And do you think that it's very valid to question the results of that election?
I think that it's a perfectly fair question. I mean, I'm one of those true believers who believes that our side should have won that election.
Our side being the Democratic Party. Wouldn't that have been better than for this world? But you said, go on.
But it's a fact of life that when you have a very close election, that the people who are in charge of the election process are going to end up breaking the tie. And so the key is to plan in advance so that there are as few possible issues that can come up in terms of how you count the vote, so that you don't have those kinds of close elections where you end up breaking the tie by deciding what the rules are after the election has occurred.
Yeah. Congress was so concerned that they actually passed this legislation, or had this been in consideration before the 2002?
2000. The legislation really combined a number of different concerns, and it was a hodgepodge compromise bill that was ultimately put together. One part of the bill was the old Republican shibboleth that we need to control our voter lists better because of the allegations that there are people voting fraudulently.
That was one of the concerns also in Florida.
That's right. Well, and in Florida,
they notified.
The opposite happened. They'd purged the voting rolls of a large number of legitimate voters improperly right before the election.
So what's required in the Congressional Act?
So the Congressional Act had 4 parts to it. One was to require voter identification when people register to vote by mail. New York has implemented that part. The second part is the requirement that there be a statewide voter registration list. And in New York, that means we had to change from a county-based registration list to putting together a statewide database. A third part was that every state would have to have provisional ballots, and that provision was actually modeled on New York's law. New York has had provisional voting.
Now, what is a provisional ballot?
That's if somebody shows up to vote at the polls and claims that they're registered, but their name isn't on the list, then they're given a paper ballot that's put into a sealed envelope, and then that can be researched after the election to determine whether, in fact, that voter was properly registered.
That means that nobody's really turned away.
That's right. And then the fourth part was to modernize voting machines. And this part of the law was flawed because Congress put the cart before the horse. Congress first required that everybody replace their voting machines, then provided that the federal government would would put up the money for it, and then finally the federal government would set standards for voting machines. And so a lot of states rapidly modernized their voting systems, had lots of problems on election day, and are now finding out that the machines that they purchased with the money that Congress provided are already out of date and don't meet appropriate standards, and
so
have
that
to
was
redo the
in
process.
the 2004 election.
That's correct. And so, for example, in Ohio, there was the problem of, especially in urban areas, of extremely long lines. Why? Because they didn't buy enough voting machines for the demand at the election districts, and so people had to wait hours to vote. And so a lot of people obviously didn't stay to cast their ballots. In a lot of jurisdictions throughout the country, there were also similar problems with machines not working, with poll workers not understanding how the new machines worked, so they couldn't open them up for the voters to use them when the polls opened, and machines malfunctioning and actually losing votes where people voted on the machines and the records of those votes are completely lost.
So did the Congress subsequently set standards?
Well, the Congress set up a new commission, the United States Election Assistance Commission, and they finally promulgated standards in December of 2005, just a few months ago. But right now, none of the...
But if they provide, if they came up with standards just a few months ago, the states were supposed to be in compliance just a few months ago.
That's January 1st, 2006 was the date for compliance, and that's why we say Congress put the cart before the horse.
So how many states do you think thought that they were in compliance, found out they weren't in compliance?
Well, many. Most states that had actually bought new voting machines are now finding that the machines they purchased don't meet the standards that were just enacted.
And so who's going to enforce the fact that they're not meeting the standards and that they have to change?
Well, the Election Assistance Commission said that the standards won't be binding on the states until December of 2007. But that becomes an issue. So, for example, in New York, we're about to buy new voting machines. We're not going to buy voting machines that don't meet the current standards just for the sake of saying that we're in compliance, because then we just have to buy new voting machines another year.
But there's another step before you get to
Right.
that, and that is that the states then have a role in setting some standards, right? The state legislature?
Well, the states can still set additional standards over and above the federal standards, and that is what New York has done. New York has taken the lead, for example, saying that if you're going to use an electronic voting machine, then there has to be a voter verifiable paper audit trail. And what that means is that even though the machine is counting the votes electronically, the voter has to be able to see a paper ballot that they can verify that the candidates they chose are actually the ones that are going to be counted on the ballot.
So there has to be a printout someplace.
That's correct.
And when you talk about that kind of a machine, it's like a computer, right?
That's
where you
right.
put your finger on
Well, it's
a
like
box or something.
everybody compares it to the automatic teller machines
Yeah.
that we all use now at banks, that it's
Right.
a touch screen machine that you touch the...
Right. We have that now at the local supermarket. And there's a woman a person has to stay there full time to help when the machine doesn't function or the person doesn't know what they're doing. So I don't know what it saves. All right, so New York State set further standards.
That's right.
Did they set standards about accessibility?
Yes, and New York actually goes way beyond the federal standards on accessibility. The federal law says that at every polling place there has to be at least one voting system that's fully accessible to disabled voters, including visually impaired voters, so that they can vote without assistance. And it's that requirement that's really driving New York to replace its lever voting machines, because no one's figured out how a blind person can vote on a lever voting machine without assistance. Right now, they go in with assistance.
Under the new regulations, we could still keep the lever voting machines?
There are some people who
keep them
argue
in repair.
about it, but it's my belief that reading the federal statute that New York's lever voting machines would comply, but for the accessibility requirement.
Then registration and the ease of voting. Did New York set different standards? Did California defeated, right? Something about having, what was that? Or is that for driver's licenses?
There are minimum standards for registration. So the minimum standard is
That's
that
the federal legislation.
That's right. That anyone who registers by mail has to provide identification at some stage in the process. That's the minimum standard. A lot of states have adopted much stricter standards requiring identification. New York has stayed pretty much with the minimum standard, and New York has gone beyond the minimum standard in terms of trying to make it easy for people to give identification. So New York accepts a lot of different forms of identification.
They didn't change anything about registration or becoming an eligible voter?
No, the procedure in New York is essentially the same. You can still just fill out the mail registration form, or you can download it from the internet and mail it in.
Now, New York State then passed along the responsibility to the counties, 62 counties, right? We have.
Now, this is something those of us in election administration had all suggested to the legislature, that it would be better to have a single statewide system. And almost all of the elections commissioners throughout the state recommended that. But the legislature got bogged down in choosing which machine should be selected for New York, and so basically booted it to each of the county commissioners.
So it wasn't a discussion, wouldn't there have been a way for the 62 county commissioners to get together and to decide what kind of machine?
That still might happen. The law doesn't require it to happen, but in fact, a lot of the county commissioners in discussions with each other believe that they should get together and at least consult in order to select the same machine, particularly so that you have at least the same machine in the same media market.
So this brings us, I mean, where we are because of the different machines in the 62 counties and the legislature not making, that brings us to the rawest and most popular issue, right, of politics these days, and that's lobbying. Is that what it is? It's a financial, it's a result of lobbying, isn't it?
Well, certainly the voting machine vendors, the companies that sell the voting machines, have spent have invested a lot in the lobbying.
How many different companies are there?
Well, there are four main companies that are competing in New York, and two of them provide both direct recording electronic machines with the touchscreen machines, and those are Sequoia Pacific and ES&S, and they also are the only vendors who are available to supply precinct-based ballot scanning vote counting machines.
Is that the optical system?
That's correct.
So they're basically two systems.
Right.
One is a computer, and the other is, how does that work?
Well, they're both computers, but
Right.
In the direct recording electronic machine or the touchscreen machine, the voter will go in to the voting booth, and it will look similar to the lever machine. The size will be about the same, but instead of having columns of levers, they will have a computer screen, and they will touch the names of the candidates that they wish to vote for. And then when they're finished voting, on the right-hand side of the machine, a ballot will print out under glass that the voter can look at and will be asked, is this how you wanted your vote recorded? And when the voter says yes, that ballot will drop off into a sealed ballot box. So the voter never touches the ballot in that electronic system. The other system, which is called precinct-based ballot scanning, when the voter signs in to vote, the voter will be given a paper ballot and will go to a voting booth, which will just be a table with a curtain around it where the voter can mark the ballot. And then the voter goes up to the machine and feeds the ballot into the machine. And the machine will determine whether the ballot can be read or whether there are any mistakes or extraneous marks that would disqualify the ballot. And if the ballot is acceptable, then the machine will count the vote that way and drop it into a sealed ballot box. If it's not, the machine will spit it out, and there'll be a little screen that tells the voter what they have to do to fix the ballot.
Now, what goes into making your decision as to which procedure?
All right. Well, at the State Board of Elections, our job is just to certify the machines, to make sure that the security, that the machines are properly secured, that they can't be tampered with, and then to make sure that the machines actually work, what we call functionality testing. And that's all the state board does. And then the county boards will have to decide among the vendors whose machines we've certified which ones to purchase. And the big debate that's going on throughout the state is whether they should use the direct recording electronic machines or the precinct-based ballot scanning
But there's a sizable financial difference.
Yes, there is, especially in the urban areas where you have very large poll sites. And the difference is, for example, New York City, it would only cost us about a third as much to have precinct-based ballot scanning,
The optical,
the optical scanning, as it would to use the direct recording machines. And that's because one machine can service 2,000 or 3,000 voters if you use a scanning machine, whereas the direct recording machine can only service a couple of hundred voters in the course of an election.
So why are people even considering the more expensive version? What does it offer that the other one doesn't offer?
Well, election administrators, and I don't include myself within that group, but the majority of my colleagues feel that it's a lot easier to work with the electronic machines because there's less paper for them to actually count and worry about the paper flow. But it is much more costly, especially, as I say, in the urban areas. In the rural areas, the reverse can be true, because in order to make the paper ballot system handicapped accessible, you also need to have then another machine that will allow a blind voter or a person with physical disabilities to fill out the ballot. And then that ballot would be brought to the scanning machine.
So how do the local counties make their decision?
Well, I think that what they should be doing is carefully analyzing the costs and the benefits of each of the systems. And based on what I've seen so far, if I were in New York City and still a New York City commissioner, I would be urging that New York City use the ballot scanning system.
You never really liked the computer system, did you? When you were a commissioner in New York, you led the fight against the machines that were being offered in those days.
I did, and I was the very first person to actually lay out the plan for a voter verifiable paper audit trail. But I have to say that now that New York requires a voter verifiable paper audit trail, they've really addressed most of my security concerns with the electronic machines. And really now it boils down to the cost of, it's much more costly to maintain the electronic machines.
Do you have any idea of numbers? I mean, can you?
Yes, that within New York City, the cost of the electronic system would be about $100 million to acquire it, and probably about $10 to $15 million a year to maintain it. And for a paper-based system, the cost of acquiring it would be $35 or $40 million, and the cost of maintaining it would only be $2 or $3 million a year.
Now, this is all federal money, though.
No.
Oh, it's not.
Well, see, this is, and this is the big, the federal government has put up a total of $220 million for all of New York State for all of the HAVA implementation requirements, including the new voter registration database system, which the voters won't see, but that's something that the government still has to set up and organize. And there's no federal money for the maintenance of the voting system. It's only for acquisition cost. And based on what we're looking at now, it's unlikely that that money will be enough to meet all of the needs for purchasing new
So then
voting
long
machines.
term down the road, when you have the machines in each county, that budget comes from that county budget, the
That's
city
correct.
budget. So it comes from the city budget.
For New York City,
Right.
New York City counts as one county. Even though we have 5 counties, the city
Right.
board is one board.
And then the ultimate irony of the whole thing is that the mayor and the city council have nothing to say about what machines are ordered and what money will go into their budget. It's all made by the Board of Elections, which everybody knows is composed at the will of the county leaders of the different parties, of the 2 parties.
That's right. The system in New York has a bipartisan election system. which provides that the political parties essentially run the boards of elections at the state level, at the county level, and even at the local precinct level. You'll have the four inspectors are divided equally between Democratic and Republican Party appointees. So in New York City, the decision will be made by the 10 New York City election commissioners, who I'm sure will be influenced by the county leaders who've
you have this wonderful incredible foresight about the elections and an incredible main set of ideas and ideals and principles about this, and I love it that you work in this system that is so cockeyed, and you still don't say it. I mean, you're fine with it. You're not fine with it, but you can move it. You manage to work in it. A lot
of reformers and good government advocates keep saying we should have a nonpartisan election system, and I laugh at that idea. Yes, it's true. So I come out of the party system, but there is no such thing as a nonpartisan election system. Didn't we see that in Bush v. Gore in 2000? That even the U.S. Supreme Court votes along party lines when it comes to deciding election matters. So any other system than one that requires agreement of the two political parties is going to be abused eventually.
It's so interesting, even as the parties really diminish in their power.
Well, there are a lot of people who have been pushing an agenda to diminish the party's power. I don't know that that's necessarily a good thing, because what we've been doing then is increasing the power of the media and increasing and money, because money now buys media time, and so who chooses our voters are no longer from political machines. They're chosen by who can assemble the most money, and I don't know that that's a good thing.
And it's also made the whole process crazy. I mean, you have to be a little crazy to run for president of the United States by going to all these primaries and spending years and spending all the money.
Well, you have to spend all your time raising money. Now, when anyone runs for office, they're not out there pressing the flesh. They're not out there spending their time going to local Democratic clubs and community organizations. They're spending their time on the phone raising money, dialing for dollars.
Before we go more into politics, New York State was not in compliance with the legislation because it didn't have its plan fully implemented by the end of the year, right?
That's right.
So you're now negotiating, the state board is negotiating with the federal government?
That's right, on an ongoing basis.
How many other states are not in compliance?
I would say that the majority of states are not in compliance in one respect or another.
Is that because of the standards now, the
That's
regulations?
correct.
Yeah. What a mess.
But New York was one of the last states to adopt its state implementing legislation, so that put us in the bullseye of the Justice Department. The legislature didn't actually reach the compromise on the system until July of last summer, and that made it very difficult for the election administration people to respond to that and get it in.
But you think you will have it all set by, we won't have new machines this election?
No, but I'm very confident that everyone will have new machines in the 2007 election. And that's actually a good year to do it, because that's the off year in the 4-year cycle.
So people will learn.
That's right.
Be able to learn. Let's go back to politics. There was a great incentive when you had power brokers and conventions and everything, because the parties were held together by the jobs and what they were able to deliver to the voters, right? And they nominated the candidates, and there was a great incentive to win. It wasn't just a personal whim that I'd like to run for president. Is that really true?
I think that incentive is still there. Everybody who runs wants to win.
Yes, but it's not necessarily the party. I mean, then they have primaries.
That's right.
And there's such a mix-up right now, because we have primaries to determine the party's candidate, but we also, in those primaries, frequently have the party supporting a candidate in that primary.
Well, the party organization,
the party
leadership will promote a candidate. I mean, that's the real function of the parties, is to organize candidates to run for office, and that's how the parties formed. I don't know if you want to go into the history of all this, but until 1890, the government didn't print ballots. People were responsible for providing their own ballot. And so what happened is that community organizations, really the lodges, would print tickets of candidates that they were recommending for election and hand out those tickets to voters.
So that's the palm card.
Well, it's like the palm card that we get now, and that's where it comes from, right?
Yeah.
And Tammany Hall was a benevolent lodge, and it was the middle-class lodge in New York, York City, and they would endorse candidates for local election. And the Tammany tickets were always printed in green. That's why the Democratic palm cards were always green.
And the petitions?
And were green. That came from, and the political parties were never officially recognized by the government until the government decided that they needed to reform the process to print ballots. And the reason they had to do that was there were two main reasons. One is that people would counterfeit the tickets. You'd have the candidates that everybody knew at the top of the ticket.
And then they'd add their names.
And then they'd add their own local insurgents at the bottom. And you'd think you were voting, say, the Tammany ticket, because they handed you the green card with Grover Cleveland's name at the top, and you'd think that was the Tammany ticket.
You have to tell me quickly what the next reason is.
And the other reason is that they didn't have to print out their tickets until Election Day.
Oh.
So you wouldn't even know who the candidates were until the morning of the election.
Well, I love the political discussion. So next time you come on this program, we're not going to talk about election law and the regulations and everything. We're going to talk about politics. All right? Thank you, Doug Kellner. Good luck.
Thank you, Ronnie.
If there are any people you'd like to hear and topics you'd like us to explore, please let me know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.